how one New York City school custodian spends 4 hours of the 8-hour day he's being paid for. Cleaning up his school? No, cleaning up his yacht.
This is Bob Rafsky, a 47-year-old divorced Harvard grad who has AIDS.
How long are you prepared to stay under here handcuffed to this axle?
Until I feel that I'm going to lose a finger or so.
Some of their fellow activists complain that these 60s-like tactics are passé.
We may be passé, but the price of the drug we were protesting under those trucks is coming down. If that's passé, I'll stay passé until I die.
What's the difference in this than having a loan shark? And it's just as wrong now, if it's done in this way, as it was done on a street corner when you had a loan shark loaning money.
That's exactly what happened to this couple. They got a mortgage. Their interest rate, 20.99%.
Well, I don't know what y'all call it up north, but down here in the South, we call it cheating and swindling.
I'm Mike Wallace.
I'm Willie Safer.
I'm Ed Bradley.
I'm Steve Croft.
I'm Leslie Stahl. Those stories and Andy Rooney tonight on 60 Minutes.
Imagine a job that pays nearly double the national average. A job where virtually no one ever checks to see when or even if you show up for work. A job where if you haven't already put your relatives on the payroll, you can get a friend across town to put them on his. If it sounds like you could clean up on a job like that, you'd be right. Just apply to the New York City Board of Education and tell them you'd like to be a school custodian. Cleaning up as a New York City school custodian doesn't mean pushing a broom. Custodians are more like building superintendents than janitors. They're responsible for keeping the school well-maintained and clean. They hire their own staff, and thanks to the work rules, even they don't have to sweep very often. New York City school custodians have a list of perks, pay, and privileges that stuns almost anyone that's visited the rundown, dirty schools that make up much of the system. This is Erasmus Hall in Brooklyn, a building where 3,000 students try to get a high school education. The Board of Education didn't want 60 Minutes taping in its school corridors, but the president of the Erasmus Hall Parents Association offered to take us and our concealed camera on a tour. Up the dirty stairwells and down hallways covered with graffiti. This is like 32 miles of the New York subways. There was peeling paint everywhere and broken drinking fountains.
We've only got 2 water fountains operating in the school.
Then we went into the bathrooms.
There's absolutely no privacy and no facilities for cleaning yourself up appropriately.
And when the sights didn't shock you, the odors did. What is the smell?
We have apparently some sewage leaking underground. The odor is unbelievable. It's like living in a cesspool.
And everywhere, broken windows. How long have these windows been broken?
The windows have been broken for weeks.
No one is claiming it's easy to maintain old and long-neglected schools, but almost everyone we talked to thought school custodians weren't doing the job as well as they should. Tell me about Mr. White, the custodian. Is he ever here?
Mr. White, as I know it, and I'm here approximately every day, is here maybe a few hours a day. I've even had cleaners complain that he's seldom on the premises.
On the day we waited to see Mr. White, it was after 2 p.m. when he pulled up to the school gate. He was gone by 4:15. None of this is a surprise to John Fager, chairman of the Citywide Parents Coalition. He began to get interested in the custodial system 8 years ago, when the principal of his children's school called to tell him that the cafeteria was so filthy it had been cited for a health code violation.
Can you imagine 1,000 kids eating in a small cafeteria? By the end of the week, if you only scrub it once a week.
They only have to scrub it once a week?
They only scrub the cafeteria floor once a week.
How often do they have to clean the classrooms?
Every other day.
Every other day?
Every other day.
How often do they have to mop the floors?
They mop 3 times a year.
You're kidding.
No, they mop and wax 3 times a year. It's a basic sweeping. That's what goes on every other day.
What do they do the rest of the time?
No one really knows.
New York School's Chancellor Joe Fernandez is the latest in a long list of reformers who have tried to sweep away a bizarre set of contract regulations and work rules that allows the city school custodians to clean up all the way to the bank. Fernandez says it's a problem he began to deal with on his very first day on the job 2.5 years ago.
I walked into my office and I saw these telephone wires that were laying around the floor all over the rug. And I asked for the custodian to come up to clean the thing, and I was told that they don't vacuum it until next week. This is off schedule. Of course, I hit the ceiling.
Do the custodians paint?
Yeah. However, they only can paint up to 8 feet. Some of these things I'm going to tell you are going to sound ludicrous, but it's the reality.
Why 8 feet?
It's a jurisdictional issue with the painters union.
I want to make sure that I've got my figures right, because we've been told that the average base salary for a custodian in New York City is $58,000 a year.
Yeah, that's the average, right?
Which is $20,000 more than a teacher makes.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely correct. That's one of the problems I have.
That salary gap is not a problem for James Kelly, the custodian at Intermediate School 70 and the president of Local 891 of the International Union of Operating Engineers, the 1,000-member custodians local.
To compare us to teachers is a very unfair comparison.
Why?
It's not our fault to begin with that the Board of Education does not pay its teachers enough. But I think it's unfair to compare us to teachers. First of all, we work all year round. Teachers work about half the hours we do. So just in time alone, the hours we spend in a school building versus what a teacher or anybody else in a building other than us spends, there's a big difference there.
That's the justification for the $20,000 salary difference?
I would say so.
You think your men are underpaid?
Absolutely, of course.
Kelly blames the shape the schools are in on the Board of Education. He says it sets the cleaning schedule, not the union, and that custodians' work orders for major maintenance languish in the board's backed-up bureaucracy. But teachers, principals, and parents we talk to think that the custodians could be doing a lot of the work themselves.
The joke among the principals is when they die and they want to come back to earth as custodians.
Reincarnate as a custodian, that's not a bad idea. I often tell the story when I first got here to New York and I went to visit a school in the South Bronx. It was a very nice school, very well done, but I walked into the front door and I saw this person in a suit, shirt, and tie, and I thought it was the principal. I went over and introduced myself, was the head custodian, with his own office and everything.
His own office often means his own secretary, and his own secretary often means his own wife, and an additional $25,000 to $30,000 in family income. While nepotism was banned in a rare contract reform, relatives and wives already on the payroll were grandfathered into their jobs. And today, according to school administrators, custodians simply get around the rule by hiring each other's wives.
There are custodians who have other custodians' wives working for them. That's correct.
Good practice?
Well, it's not so easy to find capable people all the time to do a particular job, so...
They hire their wives?
They can hire their wives.
Is that what you're saying?
They can hire their wives.
So they hire someone else's wife? They hire one of their friends' wives?
Almost all married women are somebody else's wife, right?
It sounds like a pretty good job.
Yeah, I guess if you want to make a lot of money and you want to get some of your family working and you want to have a Jeep and a lot of other perks, it's a great job. You know,
Jeep?
sort of Jeep. Yeah. The Board of Ed spends $1 million a year subsidizing the custodians' purchasing of Jeeps.
Why do they need a Jeep?
Well, Steve, you're not aware of this, I know, but according to the contract, New York City is in a snow belt, and we have a 5 out of 12 months are snow season. So the board spends 5/12, buys 5/12 of the Jeep, and the custodian buys 7/12, but after 5 years, guess who ends up owning the Jeep outright?
The custodians.
The custodian. Right.
How much money would it cost you to get a schoolyard plowed if it snowed? If you were going to go out and hire somebody to do it?
It'll cost you nothing because in New York City, you wait till 3 o'clock that afternoon and it all melts.
Earlier this year, Chancellor Fernandez put a hold on buying new utility vehicles, no matter what brand everybody calls them Jeeps, by insisting that custodians get his personal approval before every purchase. It's a rule the custodians union expects to overturn in arbitration.
I may lose that, but at least we're fighting the good fight on this. You speak to anybody out there and they will tell you that the custodial contract has to be changed, that there are things in a custodial contract that can't stay in there any longer.
Fernandez isn't the first person to say that. The Women's City Club of New York said the same thing in this report, and that was back in 1942. Over the years, the Board of Education has been unwilling to take on the politically powerful union, and local principals have been afraid to take on individual custodians who run their schools as private fiefdoms.
You can go out and talk to principals, and if they're courageous enough, some of the principals will tell you is that they're afraid of giving the custodians a bad evaluation because they'll take it out on them in other ways in maintaining the building.
We took the chancellor's advice and tried to talk with some principals. We called more than 3 dozen. Plenty had tales to tell off the record, but not in front of our cameras. One principal who was willing to talk was later instructed to cancel her interview by her district superintendent. A matter of personal safety, he told her. 2 others said that they'd had their tires slashed after talking to reporters. Finally, we found one principal willing to speak out.
Gloria Rakovic at Brooklyn's High School of Telecommunications told us the biggest problem is the custodians don't work for the principal. She has no control over her school's maintenance schedule, budget, or custodial staff. The custodians answer only to a central maintenance office. Mrs. Rakovic says her present custodian does a good job, but in the past, she's been saddled with what she calls
the vanishing custodian. Recently, I had one who was absent for 75 days out of the school year.
Which is what, 180 days?
180 days. So you're figuring you're almost at a 50% absentee rate. There are emergencies that happen in the building. The custodian is my technical consultant. I need that person. I depend on that person.
And you had one custodian that was here barely half the time?
That's right. Exactly.
Is the case of the vanishing custodian fairly common in New York City?
One of the issues at hand from colleagues that I hear about simply is, I don't know where my custodian is.
They may not know, but Ed Stanzik does. Stanzik, a former rackets prosecutor, is the independent special commissioner for investigation for New York schools.
There are people who conduct completely different careers outside the school on Board of Ed time. We have a custodian who's a charter pilot for hire, flying people around the country on Board of Ed time.
Owns his own plane.
That's right. We have another custodian who's a practicing real estate attorney. We got complaints from the principal he could never reach the custodian because he was in court. That's not the same thing as someone calling in sick so they can go fishing.
The overwhelming majority of custodians are right on site at all times. There are any number of reasons you have to go out, leave the building or leave the site to do a particular thing. But our men are on the jobs.
Mr. Kelly is apparently unfamiliar with William Ryan, New York school custodian. Mr. Ryan is custodian of a school administrative building in Brooklyn. On the day we followed him, one of the many days where Ed Stanzik's investigators followed him, he arrived at his building at 8:45. He left on errands twice in the morning, and by 11:45 he was gone for the day. After a leisurely lunch at a seaside restaurant, he was off to Long Beach, Long Island, and an afternoon aboard his 34-foot cabin cruiser. All of it on school time.
In the time that we've been watching him, at least half of that time, he's been outside the school working on his cabin cruiser while he should have been in school and was getting paid to be in school.
How many William Ryans are there out there?
I can't give you a number. I can't tell you that there's 100 or 200 William Ryans out there. I can tell you that as we've looked at the problem both historically up to the present day, the cases that we're doing, it's a persistent enough problem that you can't just say it's a couple of bad apples.
But Stanzik says vanishing custodians are only part of what his investigation has turned up. Remember those Jeeps? Well, like everything else the custodians pay for, from floor wax to computers,
the money for his salary, his workers' salaries, and his expenses comes payable to him personally. It goes into, typically goes into his personal checkbook with the money.
He gets a check from the city and he just puts it in his bank account?
That's right. And it gets mixed up with the money he uses to buy his groceries and make his car payments and everything else.
Is there any oversight at all?
There is oversight, but a system like that has many opportunities for someone with larceny in his heart to get around the controls.
In the last couple of years, you've had to cut $750 million out of your budget. You've had to do away with programs. You've had teachers' jobs on the line. Why can't you change this?
It's a matter of what's in a contract and what has to be implemented. We are looking, as I said, at the entire custodial contract. I would love to be able to pay teachers what we pay custodians.
Do you understand how ridiculous that sounds?
Of course it's ridiculous. Of course it's ridiculous.
And New York City's not alone. In many big cities across the country, more than half the school salary checks every month go to people other than teachers. In New York this week, there was a move to change that. As the result of the special commissioner's investigation, 3 school custodians, including our yachtsman, were arrested. 5 others will probably be fired. And those who aren't will, if all goes according to plan, from now on report to the principal. How does the president of the union feel about this? Well, he's no longer president of the union. He didn't get reelected.
A few weeks ago on 60 Minutes, you met 2 men who worked quietly behind the scenes to persuade the government to pay more attention to people with AIDS. Tonight, meet 3 people who do much the same thing anyway, but quietly. They're members of a group called ACT UP, and they'll do anything they can to pressure anyone they think can help in the fight against AIDS. They don't care who he is.
The next thing I know, one of these ACT UP groups is out saying Bush ought to change his behavior. You can't talk about it rationally. The extremes are hurting the AIDS cause.
You might not like the extremes they go to, but they couldn't care less. They're angry and they're dying, and there's no cure in sight.
I'm HIV positive. I'm willing to do anything I can to save my life and the lives of my friends.
We're hitting a Japanese pharmaceutical company in Fort Lee, New Jersey tomorrow morning.
Peter Staley is 31, single, and a former Wall Street bond dealer. He and ACT UP are planning to shut down Daiichi, a Japanese drug company. The night before, Staley alerts the media.
And we hope you can get a photographer there.
Yeah. Follow me.
ACT UP is picking on Daiichi because some researchers have told them the company is dragging its feet developing a new AIDS drug. Daiichi says the researchers do not have good information, that the company is developing this drug as rapidly as it can.
Okay. Hi, I'm with ACT UP, and we're doing an act of civil disobedience. Would you please remain calm?
Tell me, but can you get in any further? Okay.
Jim, it's Peter, we're in. Send all the press.
5 news organizations show up. Then it's showtime.
And those of us like me who have Kaposi sarcoma are going to die because of your stupid and piggish policies, and we are here until we get arrested. So have a good day.
This is Bob Rafsky, a 47-year-old divorced Harvard grad who has AIDS.
This stuff on my face is Kaposi sarcoma, which is an AIDS-related cancer. There are drugs that will only attack the cancer cells for Kaposi sarcoma, and they're being developed too slowly, and Daiichi has the best one.
But that drug has not proven to be effective.
It looks very good in animals. It looks very good in the test tube. I am ready, willing, and able to take that drug on an experimental basis, but they won't give it to me.
Look, I'm not a scientist. I'm not located in Japan, okay? I know that there's a lot of work going on there. And I know that we're going to meet with the FDA as soon as we can.
See this dark mark on my forehead? That's Kaposi sarcoma. It's going to spread. It's going to kill me. You're coming to my funeral because you're the man responsible. You are my murderer in your shirt and tie.
The Daiichi official you called a murderer. What gives you the right to do that?
He's going to stay where he is with power over my life and do nothing and go home every day and eat dinner and think he's a fine human being. I'm going to call him a murderer, and I do have the right.
But isn't he doing what his job calls for, following the process of approval? I mean, there's steps that have to be taken.
The problem is that if everybody does business as usual, goes through all the regular routine processes of their day-to-day life, we will all die.
Rafsky knows he's running out of time. His immune system is gone. So every afternoon he walks Sarah, his 7-year-old daughter, home from school. Until 1985, Rafsky was living the American dream. He was a successful public relations executive. Then he faced the fact he was gay. He divorced his wife and came out of the closet.
You were infected in 1987?
Yes.
You're an intelligent man?
Correct.
Information about AIDS was available back then in 1987?
Also correct.
If anyone should have known how to avoid this virus, it was you.
I agree with you. I came out at age 40. It was very bad timing to come out in the middle of an epidemic. But by age 40, it had been drummed into me year after year after year that homosexuality was a thing to be ashamed of and possibly to be punished for. And that may have had something to do with my behavior.
Do you assume responsibility for your infection?
Yes, I do. The question is, what does a decent society do with people who hurt themselves because they're human, who smoke too much, who eat too much, who drive carelessly, who don't have safe sex?
And the answer?
I think the answer is that a decent society does not put people out to pasture and let them die because they've done a human thing.
Ravsky refuses to be ignored by politicians. During the Democratic primaries, he disrupted a Clinton speech. Ravsky also went with ACT UP to Washington to protest what he calls President Bush's lack of AIDS leadership.
George Bush has been sitting in the White House the entire time we've been dying, 11 years.
Ravsky and others chained themselves to the White House fence, calling on the government to research an AIDS cure the way it developed the atom bomb with the Manhattan Project. President Bush counters that AIDS research gets more money than cancer or heart disease.
To compare us against cancer and pit us against other victims of other diseases is a sorry, sorry argument.
Ravsky says what's also sorry is the abuse gay men face over AIDS. A park policeman tells Ravsky he's getting what he deserves for being gay.
This man just said if I stopped taking it in the ass, that I wouldn't have AIDS. That's his ignorance. This man right here. Get rid of this homophobic, ignorant. What you know about AIDS is why we're dying.
Is there ever a temptation to just not fight, just to go gently?
No, I do not want to go gentle into that good night. I want to fight to the last possible moment. It gives me a reason for living.
Doctor's office? Hi, it's Peter Staley.
For Peter Staley, this is the moment he fears most, when he calls the lab to get the T-cell count of his blood. It tells him how strong his immune system is.
Peter? Yep. The blood count is okay. No change in T-cells. The beta-2 is normal. Good news. Okay. Thank you.
Why is that good news?
As long as I'm at a safe level with my immune system, which it is right now, and I can stay there, I'm happy.
On the outside, Staley's been ACT UP's guerrilla leader, always getting arrested. But behind the scenes, he says ACT UP has made experimental drugs available faster, forced companies to cut prices, and pressured the government into consulting people with AIDS about its research.
What's more important these days, the demonstrations or the work that you're doing behind the scenes?
It is the fear of a demonstration that gets us through the door.
Astra, a Swedish drug company with offices outside Boston, is Peter Staley's next target.
Did you tell the company that you would ruin their public image if they didn't lower the price of the drug?
Yes, we did. We're not going to beat around the bush. We asked them, we sat down with them, we argued with them, trying to get that price down.
Do you want these drug companies to be afraid of you?
It helps.
All right. Would you resort to violence?
I would resort to violence at the drop of a hat if I thought it would help.
ACT UP pulls in front of Astra in rented trucks, blocking employees from driving to work and pushing their demands that the company lower the price of a drug that can prevent blindness in AIDS patients. The company says it's charging so much because it needs to recover $100 million in research costs. Under these trucks, ACT UP protesters are chained so the truck can't be moved.
Does doing this make it any easier for you?
Yes, it does. Astra is trying to make a killing off of this epidemic. This is no longer a drug company. This is a foreign-owned criminal enterprise attempting to make a killing off of my life.
How long are you prepared to stay under here handcuffed to this axle?
Until I feel that I'm going to lose a finger or so.
What's that? You in charge here? Yes, I am. You're under arrest.
The police move in, first arresting ringleader Staley.
We called the shots here.
You're going to break my arm in a minute, buddy. And then
break my arm.
Then the police chief gives the order to move the truck slowly, even though the protesters are lying underneath. act-up members cave in, coming out from under the trucks, and they are arrested. Some of their fellow activists complain that these 60s-like tactics are passé.
We may be passé, but the price of the drug we were protesting under those trucks is coming down. If that's passé, I'll stay passé until I die.
Marina Alvarez has never been arrested in an ACT UP demonstration. Never. She's a different kind of activist. She's a 40-year-old mother with 2 young sons who's been HIV positive for 7 years. She says she doesn't know how she got infected with the virus. These days, when she goes to jail at Rikers Island, it's to educate for ACT UP, not to serve time. She knows these inmates because she was behind bars when she found out she had the virus. She was a drug addict doing time for passing bad checks. After 5 years drug-free, she's back to teach.
There are things that you should look for when you look for a condom, and that's that it be latex. Latex, meaning the rubber on it, you should read on the label that it says latex condom, also that it's lubricated. We got to get our act together, and we got to do something for ourselves now, because if we're going to sit around and wait for a cure, a lot of us are going to die. A lot of us are going to die, and that's my message to you guys today. That's right.
You said you're not sure how you were infected. You were married at the time?
Yes.
Could it have been your husband?
Possibly, yeah.
Has he been tested?
No, he hasn't. He doesn't want to get tested. He says that he doesn't care to know.
He knows that you are positive, and he doesn't want to know?
No.
And Marina says her ex-husband isn't unusual. Few people in her Bronx neighborhood want to face the reality of AIDS. So she goes to places like laundromats where people have time to listen. She goes armed with pamphlets in Spanish, condoms for teenage girls, and blunt talk to a woman who doesn't know how the virus is spread.
There hasn't been that one known case that anybody drank behind somebody in a water fountain and got it. Okay. You know, that hasn't. Okay.
Alvarez also visits women with AIDS who are all alone in public hospitals.
Are you afraid at all?
There's fear of maybe what I'll go through or how it will be for me. I've seen it so different for so many other people. And yeah, I'm afraid.
Do you think that you'll live to see a cure?
No, I don't.
Do you think that you'll live to see a cure? No. No. You expect to die from this.
There's really nobody else out there fighting the epidemic in the way that we are.
Peter Staley recently got a drug company to donate $1 million for AIDS research. Marina Alvarez spoke at the International Conference on AIDS. And Bob Ratsky is starting to write a book. He says it's for his daughter Sarah so she'll know what her father did to fight AIDS.
Happy birthday! 1, 2, 3.
It's a matter of interest, literally a matter of interest, that's moved the Attorney General of the state of Georgia to begin a major investigation into Fleet Finance, the highly profitable subsidiary of Fleet, the 14th largest bank holding company in the country. What the Attorney General may be discovering is something that thousands of unhappy Georgia borrowers have known for a long time, that if you're poor and desperate, there's a very good chance you'll end up at the sign of the friendly sales. You can't miss them, they're everywhere, not just in Georgia, but throughout New England, in 40 states. These sales may be sales of hope for depositors, but in Georgia, where Fleet Finance is based, more than 20,000 borrowers think those sales look more like fins, the fins of loan sharks. Craig Soares has a mortgage with Fleet.
You don't miss a Fleet payment. Everyone will tell you that.
What happens?
Just start packing your boxes. Bottom line, pack your boxes. Everyone will tell you that. Even the brokers will tell you, now I'm getting you this deal, but don't be late.
They didn't want your money, they wanted your house.
They wanted our houses.
Fleet Finance deals in home equity loans, loans in which a house is put up as collateral. The borrower may want the money for repairs or simply to pay off other debts. Fleet's interest rates in neighborhoods like this are way above the going rate because the borrowers are considered high risk, unable to get loans from traditional banks. And yet many of the borrowers have a lot of equity in these homes. Whatever outstanding debt there is quite small. Fleet's position has been described generally as no lose. If the homeowner pays on time, Fleet benefits from the high interest. If he doesn't and Fleet forecloses, Fleet buys the house at the foreclosure sale and resells it, often at a tidy profit.
And I have named them the vulture of the mortgage world.
Craig Soares and his wife were desperate when they got a $78,000 loan at a whopping 20.99% interest. What was the general mortgage rate?
8.5. 8.5.
8.5?
Yeah, prime rate was 8.5.
That was the prime rate. The general mortgage rate was 9.25, compared to the 20.99% Soares was paying.
Is either take this or hit the door.
In fact, in most of its home equity business in Georgia, Fleet itself did not make the original loans. It purchased the loans from other lenders, small companies with names like Mortgage Makers, Tower Financial Services, Georgia Mortgage, and Parkway. It's alleged that these companies existed primarily to service Fleet. Borrowers had no idea when they got the money that within days, or even hours, they'd become clients of Fleet. By the late 80s, Fleet had become the godfather of the secondary mortgage market.
They prey on the emotions, they prey on the desperation, and they prey on the ignorance.
Randolph Wright's is a fairly typical story. This house had been in his family for more than 20 years. He had $37,000 in equity in the house when he got a loan with Fleet at 22% interest. He fell behind and Fleet foreclosed, bought his house, and then sold it at a profit. Randolph lost the house, all of his equity, and now rents from the new owners. Randolph, his two brothers, and his mother have all had problems with Fleet. His brother Willie doesn't think this is a coincidence.
I just think they just target certain people. And I just think we just happen to be of all the same kind of people that they primarily target.
Homeowners, lots of equity, black.
Right. And that had been turned down from a bank.
And getting turned down at a traditional bank opens the door for Fleet.
These people are sitting ducks for Fleet. Fleet fills the vacuum.
Bill Brennan, a legal aid lawyer in Atlanta, holds a workshop once a month for prospective home buyers.
We allege that they are engaging in a criminal conspiracy to take houses away from people.
Brennan represents a group of homeowners who allege in lawsuits that Fleet not only violates state laws against usury, but through a network of other companies controlled by Fleet, set up what amounts to a loan shark racket. Those allegations are repeated in other suits against Fleet, plus charges of inflated lawyers' fees and closing fees.
These mortgages that these companies get are immediately sold to Fleet. All or most of them are. In some cases, 99% with one company.
The process begins with so-called bird dogs, men like Charles Hastings.
I'm not a salaried person. I get up every day and go out and find business.
He's one of a group of unregulated brokers who advertise in and cruise black neighborhoods trying to convince homeowners to borrow money. They work on commission for the small-time lenders who ultimately sell loans to Fleet.
And what I'm suggesting is that these local mortgage companies and brokers are Fleet's employees. Those local mortgage companies are simply pass-through companies. The mortgages come through them to Fleet.
We deny the allegations in the lawsuits that have been filed against Fleet.
Terry Franzine is a staff attorney for Fleet Finance.
Isn't this another language called deniability, when you have this shell company out there whose existence basically is to service you with loans?
Not at all. The companies from whom we bought loans are independent companies that, Fleet has absolutely no control over them.
Oh, you have enormous control over them.
I don't think so.
Well, if you don't like the way they work, you won't buy from them.
That's very true. That's very true.
That's the ultimate control.
That's true.
Total control over a company like Georgia Mortgage, for example. Mark Siegel, the owner, says Fleet told him precisely how to run his business. And what percentage of his loans went to Fleet?
100%.
Purely and simply 100%.
100%. Probably toward the end of 1984 until maybe 1989 or 90, I'm not sure which.
He says he sold Fleet over $12 million worth of loans every year for 7 years. And for each one, he got a stamp of approval from Fleet before the loan was made. Pre-approval, it's called.
They would look at the cover letter, see what the loan was all about, look at the application, see what the guy, maybe how long he lived in the house, what he did for a living, self-employed or worked for somebody. And they look at the credit and then approve it either the way we wrote it up or they modify it.
Attorney Roy Barnes also represents minority homeowners suing Fleet.
This is so egregious, so wrong, that everybody tries to create this barrier, said, my hands are not dirty. Well, you can't be in this business, and you can't look at these loans and say that Fleet's not responsible. They had to know what was going on. They had the profits, they had the pre-approval, they had the connections, and they knew that the yields were great.
Denise Wright, a loan officer at Georgia Mortgage, took her loans to Fleet for pre-approval almost every day.
Do they care much about the person's credit, about the person's cash flow?
I mean, I had them approved with negative cash flow. They wrote on there, negative cash flow.
Approved.
Approved.
No
No-brainer.
lose situation.
Yeah.
Because if the person fails to pay off,
They take the house. Simple as that.
60 Minutes and the Atlanta Legal Aid Society made a study of the lending practices of Fleet Finance in DeKalb and Fulton counties. An examination of 11,000 loans for the last 10 years showed Fleet's foreclosure rate was 8.5%, more than 11 times the national rate.
What's the difference in this than having a loan shark? And it's just as wrong now, if it's done in this way, as it was done on a street corner in the newsstand when you had a loan shark loaning money.
Just hours before we were scheduled to interview Fleet, the company announced a radical change in policy. From now on, Fleet would make their own loans and would no longer buy them from other lenders. Fleet also initiated a $40 million program to help some of their customers by reducing interest rates, points, and fees on what the company calls troublesome loans.
Isn't that an admission that you were doing something wrong up till a few hours ago?
No, not at all. 5 years ago, our senior management looked at the loans that we were purchasing and saw some things that were not illegal but were troublesome.
Well, what do you mean by troublesome?
For instance, the number of points which some of the lenders were charging.
What sort of numbers do you mean that troubled Fleet?
10 points, 15 points.
Not 18 or 30?
Well, I haven't seen any that are 30.
Then they must have missed the 31.5 points Raymond Bryant paid for his loan. He borrowed $11,400, but had to pay back $3,500 in various finance fees. At the end of his 15-year loan, he would have paid more than $47,000 on the $11,400 he actually got. It's loans like this that Fleet might consider troublesome.
Those customers who feel that they have been harmed in some way by a loan which another lender made, Fleet is willing to rectify those harms and make sure that that customer is happy.
But remember, all those loans by, quote, other lenders, unquote, were approved in advance by Fleet.
You must feel that Fleet, this wonderfully sophisticated, rich company, was terribly gullible in dealing with these vicious, mean-spirited, original lenders. I mean, you don't give away $40 million because you like the community, do you?
Well, that's exactly what we're doing. Because we have had complaints in the last year from customers.
How many?
Oh, gosh. Not many.
Not many?
I don't know.
What Fleet Finance does know is that there are more than 20,000 plaintiffs taking part in 2 class action suits against Fleet. Lawyers handling the cases aren't impressed with Fleet's offer. They say $40 million is a mere drop in the bucket compared to what homeowners might get if they win in court, which could cost Fleet between $500 million and $1 billion.
Hear ye, State of Georgia, County of Fulton.
Georgia is one of the few states where all it takes to foreclose on a home is a certified letter and an announcement in the newspaper. And after that, the first Tuesday of every month in every county in Georgia, the courthouse steps become the stage for this bureaucratic theater of misery. Properties auctioned to the highest bidder.
The debtor's name is Raymond Bryant, and again, the lender is Fleet Finance, Inc. of Georgia.
Foreclosure is what Raymond Bryant feared most, and it's precisely what he got.
I did everything but get on my knees.
What'd they say?
They said that they couldn't give me no more chances or no more time.
It's not uncommon for Fleet to foreclose on a house, then buy it on the courthouse steps for much less than it's worth. The borrower not only loses his house, but under Georgia law, he can end up losing whatever equity he had in it. That's what happened to Willie Wright. When he started with Fleet, he had at least $20,000 worth of equity in his home. When he was finished with Fleet, he'd lost the house and the equity.
If you were describing this business not in the arcane language of the law, but in street language, what would you call it?
Well, I don't know what y'all call it up north, but down here in the South, we call it cheating and swindling. It's a type of bondage that is taking advantage of the most helpless, the ones that have the least ability to fight back.
So far, this is where the fight stands. Fleet won round one when a federal court ruled that their interest rates were not excessive. In round two, a state court ruled that Fleet's interest rates were excessive. The case is proceeding to trial.
Tonight, Andy Rooney goes plum picking with Bill Clinton.
One of the first things a president-elect has to do is get his own people in key jobs in Washington so they do things his way. Once he decides what his way is, of course. This is the list of the jobs that the president and his people can appoint. They aren't competitive like civil service jobs, and for that reason, this is known as the Plumbook. One of the jobs in here is a political plum. There are about 9,000 of them. 6 pages of White House jobs alone. Here's one, Deputy Assistant to President for Presidential Messages and Correspondence. The person doing that job probably gets to send those telegrams they read from the president at parties congratulating someone for being 100 years old or for winning their company bowling trophy. There's 6 speechwriter openings here. The president makes speeches all day long, and you can't expect him to think of something new to say all the time. You know, he meets the Olympic volleyball team or speaks to a bunch of Boy Scouts in the Rose Garden. But 211 pages of jobs here. Do you know this many people you'd want to give jobs to? I mean, once you've taken care of a few friends and everyone in your family, where would you go to fill these? Here's the Defense Department. Clinton has said he's going to make some cuts there. It should be possible. The Secretary of Defense, the Deputy Secretary, the Special Assistant to the Secretary and Deputy Secretary, Assistant to the Secretary, Executive Assistant to the Deputy Secretary, Executive Assistant to the Secretary, Confidential Assistant to the Special Assistant, Personal and Confidential Assistant to the Deputy Secretary, Private Secretary to the Deputy Secretary, Personal Secretary to the Deputy Secretary, Chauffeur to the Deputy Secretary, Private Secretary to the Executive Secretary. You notice the chauffeur doesn't have a deputy or a secretary. Can't you imagine a new kid from Little Rock coming to school in Washington next fall? The teacher asks him what his father does, and he says, he's Deputy Assistant Secretary to the Assistant Deputy Secretary. I know one thing. When Bill Clinton crawls into bed at night and wants to relax with a good mystery before he falls asleep, this is the book for him. The mystery is why all these jobs are necessary.
The mail this week was chock full of letters about Caitlin, the little girl whose life was made brighter by a device called a cochlear implant. Most of the letters took issue with those who disputed her parents' decision not to have her learn sign language. This letter, for example. How could anyone deny Caitlin a chance at a normal life on the grounds that she now belongs to the deaf community? Followed by, sounds to me like segregation by disability. Our story about a company called Lincoln Electric brought several comments, all the way from slave labor for slave wages to an honest day's work for an honest day's pay. And finally, about our profile of Kirk Douglas, there was this. If he thinks that women should be more like a dog, we think he should be more like a tree. I'm Mike Wallace. We'll be back next week with another edition of 60 Minutes.
How long are you prepared to stay under here, handcuffed to this axle?
Until I feel that I'm going to lose a finger or toe.
What's that? You in charge here?
Yes, sir. You're under arrest.
Take this radio.
No need to hurt.
We call the shots here.
You're going to break my arm in a minute, buddy. And then
you break my arm, you see the camera?
Break my arm there. Go, bring it slowly.
1 hour from now, she begged the courts to protect her from her husband's abuse. It happens to thousands of women every day. Michelle Lee stars with James Sparantino and Cicely Tyson in the world premiere movie When No One Would Listen, right after Murder, She Wrote, which is next.
We may be passé, but the price of the drug we were protesting under those trucks is coming down. If that's passé, I'll stay passé until I die.
For a transcript of this program, send $5 to Burrell's Transcripts, Box 7, Livingston, New Jersey, 07039. And to purchase video cassettes of tonight's stories, call 1-800-848-3256.